is customary when beginning to discuss an academic subject to explain the nature of the subject, and since this video is the beginning of our philosophy course, I will adhere to this custom. But before I do so, I'm going to make a characteristically philosophical move and ask, what is the point of the custom of giving you a definition of the subject you are about to learn about? In other words, how does this help you? Now, obviously, a custom can serve many functions, but in this case, two seem to me to be primary. Firstly, we want to let people know what they are getting into, so they can see if it is worth it for them to get into it. In this way, a subject definition functions a little like a movie trailer. And like a movie trailer, it may also try to convince someone that the subject is indeed worth their time. But secondly, and related to this first point, when defining an academic subject, we are also trying to mentally prepare someone for the often overwhelming amount of terms, reasonings, and activities they will be asked to engage with in the course of their time with this subject. In this way, giving someone a definition of the subject is a little like giving them a clothing rack on which they can hang the various terms of the subject in an orderly fashion, and thus keep track of them. A good example of this can be found in a physics classroom. If you are in such a class, they might say that physics is the study of space, time, matter, and energy. The point of such a definition is that if you only master the function of these four terms and their interrelations, you have a pretty good way of organizing your thinking about the various concepts you will be asked to engage with in a physics class. For instance, motion is just matter changing position in space over time. Speed refers to the ratio between distance covered by a body of matter and the time it takes to cover that distance. Size is just the amount of space that matter occupies. Force is the rate at which matter changes the speed and direction of its motion when it occupies a certain relative position to something else. When we turn to philosophy, it's not uncommon that you will get a definition similar to that which you got in the physics classroom. That is, you will be supplied with an abstract set of terms, which are held by the author of the definition to be the fundamental ones in philosophy. For instance, the Encyclopedia Britannica says, philosophy is the rational, abstract, and methodical consideration of reality as a whole, or of fundamental dimensions of human existence and experience. Such a definition is not necessarily wrong, but it's not clear how helpful it is in helping the beginner organize their thoughts, because even very seasoned philosophers would struggle to master and keep clearly in mind what they mean by experience, reality, or a dimension of human existence. We've not so much a coat rack on which to hang our thoughts, as a bundle of very unwieldy and fancy pieces of clothing that are being thrown at us. In this introduction to philosophy, I will avoid giving such an abstract definition, at least at first. And instead I will tell you two origin stories of philosophy. One is set in the East, and one is set in the West. From amongst the commonalities between these two stories, we will draw a general moral. And we will find that this moral constitutes a helpful provisional framework for understanding what philosophy is about. We will begin with the story set in the West. If you look back about 2,400 years ago, you will see a slowly emerging crisis in the society of the ancient Greek culture of Athens. This crisis is over an important Greek symbol, inherited from the fountainhead of classical Greek culture, the Homeric epics. This symbol is called Arete, and it functions as a value, which is to say that if you say that someone has Arete, you mean to give them very high praise. The importance of this word for the Greeks stems from the fact that their society evolved from an aristocratic culture of warrior chieftains. As described in the Homeric epics, this culture embodied a vaguely tribal, agrarian form of life, where warriors became both civic and military leaders through a mixture of charisma and personal achievement. In such a culture, the ability to speak and the ability to fight are equally valued. And this leads to a general notion of individual greatness, a greatness that involves both intelligence, bravery, and competence. It is the idea of this charismatic leadership, based on physical strength, intelligence, and speaking ability, that gives rise to the notion of arete, And because the capacities embodied in Arete are so foundational to the social order, they constitute the highest form of praise in this Homeric society. The problem is that as Athenian society evolved, it became more urbanized, affluent, and democratic. And this new urban situation, involving a complicated division of labor and a good deal of class stratification, entailed the need for new values, new ideas of what is praiseworthy. In particular, the charismatic effectiveness of the warrior chieftain had to be tempered by restraint and the ability to manage societal conflict. In such a society, pure and brutal effectiveness is not as important as the ability to make concessions and accept minor defeats, if defeats are what is necessary in order to hold the people together in a kind of mutually acceptable political and economic order. Thus we find that in addition to Arete, the words Sophrosine and Dikaiosyne become increasingly important. Sophrosine represents the ability to curb one's domineering impulses, and Dikaiosyne represents one's capacity to uphold the contract embodied in the social order, and by extension, the natural order. This new conception of goodness as involving self-restraint and dedication to the social contract creates a certain ambiguity in how people use the term arete. Some are motivated to use it in a way that emphasizes the self-serving pursuit of personal aggrandizement, and some emphasize the virtues of restraint and appropriateness that emerge out of the complex social demands of Athenian society. This creates a crisis in the meaning and usage of the word, one that has political and social consequences. If a person in the private sphere and society as a whole are to use this word consistently and coherently, a process of reconciliation between old and new meanings must be achieved. This is what Plato and Plato's Socrates start to aim to do in 4th century Athens. They do this first by trying to draw people's attention to the crisis. For example, Socrates goes around Athens asking people, what is Dikaiosyne, what is Arete, and points out that people don't seem to know, i.e., that they lack a coherent conception of Arete that can reconcile the contradictory impulses of their cultural training. Finally, in Plato's mature philosophy, Plato tries to give an account of justice or Dikaiosyne and goodness in terms of an ideal world more real than this one. In the ideal world, good action is always effective, even when it appears ineffective in this world, and in this way, Plato tries to reconcile the apparent contradiction between ancient conceptions of Arete and modern conceptions of Dikaiosyne.